This is milestone 2 for week 8. So since the last month, I've spent a total of 80 hours working on developing the actual combat system. So what I have so far, I'll jump straight in. So for my player, let's get it to move around. So I've converted from script motion to root motion. So script motion is when you press, for example, going left, it goes from a value of 0 to 1, and that's just it's just sliding the character around. But in root motion, the actual animation controls the speed. So as I'm walking, if I crouch, the speed of the animation controls the speed of the character. So it's been a little bit of a hassle because I've been used to Unity and jumping to Unreal Engine, but I've finally managed to get that working. So all of this is root motion, and same with the crouching. And this has helped me to do the combat system really well. So what I've done for the combat system is, my main system is a spell system. So when I press my R key, I can choose between 4 different elements. So for example, if I do wind and earth, then they combine to sand. And then she does a little arm spell animation. So the left is earth and the right is wind. So if I shoot normally, I shoot my wind, but if I combined and then I shoot, I will shoot sand. So that's a combination. So when the spell system is active by itself, the camera locks on and locks the character facing forward, and all this is using root motion. So if this was script motion, the character will just be sliding, but because it's root, I can now get really nice blends between the animations. And so if I turn off the spell system, I can still walk around with a normal root motion. Also, I've developed a lock-on system, so if I lock on to this angle with no enemies in sight, so this big circle around me that you see, these lines, that's the sphere radius of when the enemy is in there. So right now I've locked on straight ahead, so if I keep walking forward, see how the character's walking forward still? So the character's locked on, there's the root motion, and ever so slightly, you can see the character bends, they sway the top of the shoulders to the left and right a bit more. That's using a bit of the it's getting the animation and the speed, and it slowly adjusts the animation. So it's kind of like it's a dynamic animation. So in games, when you see the players or NPCs walking by and the heads look at the player, that's using a dynamic animation that's is trying to target the actual bone to face the player's position. That's kind of the same principle with this. So if I lock off with the lock-on system, I'm back to normal. So for now, I'll go through some of the other things. So if I choose 2 fires, then I get 2 fire elements. So I can shoot my normal fire combined and shoot a bigger fire. Right now they're just placeholder projectiles. Further I want actual fire, wind, water and air. So if I go to the lock-on, we can see to the front of the player. So now if I choose to cast, so if I do water and earth, you'll see how the arms have different animations. So if I just do 2 waters, and then both of the arms will have the same animations, but say if I do air and fire, then they have separate animations. If I switch to fire and air, and then switch again. So that's got that like that. Oh, bit of frame drop there. So for now, I've only set up air to actually work projectiles with the enemies, so we'll stick with that. So now heading over to these enemies, so if I lock on steel, it just locks on straight. But if I go a bit closer to them, so this one here, see when he enters the sphere, now if I lock on, it'll actually lock on the player to face the enemy. And say I'm holding right now, and you can see, imagine there's a line drawing towards the enemy, and see how the actual position of the player is rotating around the enemy. And so if I get a bit closer and then I toggle this again, and the only this enemy is in the radius, so I toggle on, let's get a bit closer, so toggle onto him, I toggle off, it toggles off from him. And if there were 2, it switches between them. So right now I'm going to go a bit closer to them so they don't see me still. So toggle onto him and then toggles onto him. Oh, that one saw me. So what the enemies do is when they see me in their radius, they go to the closest weapon, pick up that weapon, and then chase me down. So if he gets close to me, he's going to start swinging. And these big circles that he's making are the debug for the hitboxes. And those red lines are strafing. So after he attacks for a bit, he will then start strafing around me. That's him strafing there. And say if I go and then, or I can lock onto him and see with the lock on how it actually locks onto the enemy. And when I'm in the spell system, the camera locks on, but when I get out of that, the player still locks on around him. So I can just, and to get out, I can just sprint to get out of the lock-on system. So a good example of that, if I go up to here and I can toggle between the enemies really quick like this, back and forth. So if I kill one of the enemies right now, I'm trying to do a ragdoll. So he might glitch out a bit, but see, that's the basic ragdoll. But I have a bug that the actual collider and the logic is still moving on. So if you look at the ragdoll, it went flying just then because the enemy here, their capsule collider interfered with that. So that's a bug I need to figure out to actually disable it. Because if I delete the collider and the logic right now of the enemy, it will delete the body. So I need to work around that to try and somehow separate the enemy's mesh or the character from the actual the enemy. Okay, so if I jump back over here and I jump back in game, and then if I do some debug, so it's this one, so that green there is the enemy's pathfinding. And if I make a sound, so right now the enemy's patrolling right now, so they're going up and down. I need to be a bit closer because I have a key, so when I make a noise and the enemy hears me, so right now he's patrolling. He should, see how he's investigating at the top there? And this is the path where he will go. So I hit a sound key and he heard me. And now he's going to follow that path and go to my position to where I am. I want to make it so they don't actually know exactly where I am when they hear me. But for now, just for testing debugging, he will go towards where he heard me. So we'll wait till he gets there. And then when he gets there, he will then wait. And then he goes back to patrolling. And if the enemy, so I'll just disable this. So if the enemy loses sight of me, so if I make a noise for this guy, so they both hear me, and he's chasing me now. But if I ran away, and they lose me, so he's now investigating, so he looks around and then he goes back. So as the logic for the enemy, this is the main enemy class, and this involves picking up the weapon, attacking the player, attack with the sword or with the hand in different montages. And this sphere traced by channel is when the actual enemy hits and swings their sword or their hand, then they make that sphere for debug, and that's also where the collider hits. So all of the enemy logic is located in the enemy AI. So on the run, it runs the behavior tree. So this is using a behavior tree system. So first of all, it goes through that, and then it sets up the right pawn. So this actual enemy AI instance can refer back to the controlled enemy. And then this is all setting the checks between the behavior tree. So first of all, how this works is you start with the root, goes into the selector, and it goes to the left, and then goes down, and then left, and to the next one, and then down, and it just follows the left. So for example, if this got here, and this one failed, then it will just go back, hit this, and fail. So it will keep looping his. But these different bool statements indicate whether or not to actually run this whole function. So first of all, we've got this, if you can see player and you do not have a weapon, then check if the weapon is in range, and then move to weapon location while valid. So if I go to is weapon in range function, and this function starts off with this start event. So over here, this whole event, this event, and this one's their own start. So within that start event, I first say you didn't hit the weapon, and then get all of the types of the weapons, and then for each of the weapons, so clear the previous distance, and do a trace by line between the target for the player to the location of the array of the weapons, which is over here. So he just checks between all the weapons, does some calculations. So if the weapon is not in range, then it said it's false, but then it goes through here, and if it's equal. So I also have it so when every time this loops, you would have seen before the enemy jumped up and down. That's for me for testing purposes to say that this loop was actually working, so it would jump up and jump down. It goes through more checks, and it compares, it finds between them, and it compares if the actual weapon check radius and the target is back to the enemy is greater than or equal to then the minimum float array, so the minimum in the array that it hit. And if it is, then it will set, okay, the location of this weapon, the enemy needs to go to that, and this set value sets the weapon's location value, and that sends it out saying, okay, yes, I did hit. And if I jump back to the enemy behavior tree, this is the function, and the vector here is weapon to get location, and that's when we're passing from the is weapon in range. So if I jump in this, it's just a simple function. All it's doing is it's checking is the weapon in range, and if it is, then it will move the player to the location and saying this is a success and this isn't. So if it isn't a success in the behavior tree, so if this failed, jump up, go out. But if it did, then change the status to getting weapon, and that's why at the top is getting weapon. So that's the getting weapon function. And then I've got another one over here, which is the strafe function. So if you can see and is in range, then it cools down, because I don't want the every time the enemy hits the player, I don't want them to hit strafe. I want them to hit strafe and have a 5-second cooldown, and then they strafe again. So to strafing, and then they focus the actor. So this actually locks on the way the enemy's looking, so they're going to lock on to the look at function, to look at the player while you're strafing around, so they don't strafe in weird directions. Change the enemy's speed down, and this is checking if the player in range, and there's a player in range function. It's just getting the player with the melee range, which is on the actual, which is over here, so that's 500, and then value be true or false decided by this function. And then if it is, it will loop this 5 times, so the strafe around player, so it loops this strafe function, which gets the 2 different strafe distance and the locations of the actor and the right vector, so that's why the strafe to the right. And then over here, this integer function decides if they should strafe left or right, and this left or right line is just holding a vector value of where they should strafe to. And then this trace line actually drew that red line trace that we saw before. And it just goes through this, and it says, yep, it's a success. So this will either be the left or the right way. So you move to target, then wait, and then strafe again. Loop 5, and then stop focusing, and then exit the function, and then try the next thing. So the next thing is, so this is just going to attack the player. So change the speed, check in range if it is in range. So 250, this value. This parallel will first chase the player, and while it's chasing, it can also do this sequence in the background. So if you run by the player, so if this was a normal, so for example, if it was just like these two, first it would chase and then attack. But we want the enemy to chase, and while they're chasing, if they come into range, also attack, so they can run around and attack at the same time. And then this function over here is if they investigating. So this investigating, if I go to the enemy AI, and then I go down a little bit to this update perception, and I jump into this one. Oh, sorry, it's the complete sensors. So I've set this up, so you got 3 values, 0, 1, 2. And on the AI perception up here, so the first sense is sight, the second is hearing, and the third is damage. So on site, if it did successfully here, you can see the player. And then this is hearing. So if the second switch is hearing, then you play a sound. So I have some sounds. So if the enemy hears you, they go, and then walk over. And if they're not, then they go back. It plays a sound. And if it's a damage, then it's really just not playing the sound. It's just saying like, oh, I can see the player. Oh, sorry, that's going through here. Yeah, I'm investigating now because I've been attacked. And they go to the target location. And so yeah, if you shoot the enemy, then they'll come to your location. The same with hearing the sound. And if they see you, then this is green because it's actually aborting on both. And this is saying if you're no longer investigating, jump out of this and go to the start. And then it'll check if you have a weapon or not. If you can't see the player, strafe. But if that's still running with a 5-second cooldown, then jump to attack the player and chase them. And the final little function is, okay, you cannot see player, but you have been chasing. Then do your searching. So find a random location within the actual player's location and move to that. And say I'm searching and wait. And then once you gave up, then it will jump out of here and it will go back to patrolling. So patrolling is change the status, find the path point, move to, and then wait on the designated time that I've applied. And then the patrol point type. So increment, loop, and decrement. So the actual, where are we? Let's jump back here. The actual patrolling points are over here. So this first one, if I click on this, you've got 2 path points, 0 and 1. So this enemy will go through the 0 to 1 and then go back and forth. This enemy up here, their patrol point is this. So they patrol to 0, 1, they go down the stairs to 2. So that's how you saw him walking down the stairs before, up and down. So as for the spell system, I also have it. If you choose, let's choose both water, then both the arms go water, and same with the particles, and the same with if I do fire. But also done to say if I do water fire, they blend a bit. So I jump into the lock-on so I can look around. So the right is fire and the left is water. But I want to try and get the blend just right, because I've had some issues like it's kind of okay, but the green is really hard to see. Same with not the blue too much at the back. I'm trying to work that out properly. So that's the arm particle colors. And with the lock-on system, if I go into width range, so this big sphere is a lock-on system. So I'll go to this guy, and if I lock onto him, right now I'm locked on, but if I walk out of range while I'm locked on, it will lock off automatically. And same with this if he dies. I've also done some other area blockouts. So this is the rune area of where the player would walk around. They'll go and discover the runes, and over there were the enemies from before. And also I've done a really little forest dense area, and over this way is kind of another little area with a house up on a cliff hill, and then another way over here. So if I jump into the play mode, I also try some different grass variations and how the grass moves when the player interacts with them. So I got that going, and yeah, walking up the different paths. And that's about it, what I've done in the past month worth of work. And over here more, I want to do a bit more blocker area. So this whole map, I want to be a playground test for different little biome types and what the actual world could be, because I want my map to be really big. But right now I want like a little ruins area, a little forest, some houses by some water, maybe a little river down here, and some other puzzles and places. So I have to decide on what I'm going to do with those. But yeah, so that's what I've done within the past month, and there'll be more updates soon. So yes, there you go.